Okay, in this lesson we're going to finish off our turntable animation, importing our frames into After Effects, and we're going to create some titles and loop our animation a couple times. And in this case I've brought in some of the additional footage. I've got my texture map here that I created in Mudbox, as well as the original image plane front view, and some titles here at the end. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to just create a new project. Okay, so your scene should look something like this. First thing we'll do is set up our project composition. So we're going to create a new composition here. We're going to call this Turntable Character. And for the settings, I did come in there and customize these. So you want to make sure that you are using HD 720, and the frame rate defaults here at 29.97. Since we did our render out of Maya using 24 frames per second, we're going to use the 23.976. And the duration, we'll leave that at the default 30 frames, and the background color is going to be black. So with all those set, we're going to say OK. So that sets up the overall composition for our turntable. So now we need to import our footage. So under File, we're going to say Import. And we can import individual files, multiple files, and so on. So I'm just going to go ahead and import File. And I'm going to navigate out to my desktop where I have my project folder. And inside the Images directory, this is where my files live, the 300 frames that rendered out from Maya. I'm going to select the first one, and I want to make sure that this is checked on. So I'm importing the Jpeg sequence. Okay, it should also say footage here. And go ahead and say Open. And you can see over here in our project folder that we have the frame range of 0 to 300. Okay, let's go ahead and drag and drop this down here. This is our layers, and over here is the area that we're going to work in to kind of adjust things and work with how the layers are being composited, as well as adding some fade in and fade out with keyframes. Okay, so we've got this in. I know it's not going to start on frame 1. We're going to probably push it down about till 10 seconds. So I'm just going to go ahead and move that there on the timeline. So this is our entire timeline right here of 30 seconds. Okay. I'm going to also bring in some additional files. So I want to go back out to my source images directory, and in here I've got the textures that I made in Mudbox, as well as image plane. I just recolored it in Photoshop to make it blue like the character. Control select that one. And I've also got a logo. Where did that go? There it is, a watermark. I'm just going to grab that as well and say Open. Okay, so we've got all of those. I'm going to grab all 3 of these and just go ahead and drag them down into the scene. Okay, so I have to do a little bit of scaling on these. Let's go ahead and just kind of deal with these sort of one by one. I'm going to uncheck those. I'm going to put the watermark in first. So I'm going to just drag this down to the corner. And I want to make sure that I'm using the title and action safe. Okay, so I've got this down here sitting inside of the title safe area, or action safe. Okay, and this is going to be something that's consistent throughout. So let me go ahead and give this a color to recognize it. So that's the watermark. Okay, I'm going to drag this up to the top. Okay, so this is the order of things here, much like the layers inside of Photoshop. So I've got my watermark laying on top. And down here I have the monster JPEG. So I'm just going to give that a dark green color just to recognize it out here. Then I've got the, let's go ahead and turn this one on. This is my texture map. I'm going to give that a color that I can recognize. Okay, and I'm going to scale this down. So I'm going to actually twirl this down. We've got some transform controls under here. So for scale, it's locked for X and Y. So I'm just going to scale those down. And I know it's going to go up here in the corner. Okay, probably scale it up just a little more, like that. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and just shut that off right now. And I'm going to go ahead and position now the drawing or the image plane that I created. So again, coming down to transform, I'm going to grab these, drag to the left and scale it down. And move it over here to the corner. About like that. Okay. So I've just placed those right now. We're going to come back and make some adjustments to them later on, but let's go ahead and get our titles set up now. So I'm going to turn that layer off as well. And I'm just focusing now on the turntable. So there's our 300 frames of our guy turning around. And typically you want to see about 2 turns in a character turntable animation. So I'm just going to select this, and Control D is going to duplicate it, and then I'm just going to slide this one down, and we know that frame 1 picks up where frame 300 left off, so it's just going to roll straight into the next one right there. Okay. And the 10 seconds of lead in here, we've got black right now. That's just our background for our composition. We're going to drop some titles in here to identify what this is and who made it. So I'm going to come up here and select the text and just click in our composition here and call this character design. Put my name in there, and usually you want to have some sort of way for people to contact you. I don't usually put a phone number in there, but if you have a website, that's usually good. People can also go out and see any additional work that you've done. So with those selected, I'm going to scale them up a little bit. I'm also going to come down here to paragraph and center those. I also want to align them, so I want to make sure they're centered this way as well as centered up and down. Okay. And I'm going to adjust some of the text size on the things that are a little bit less important. So I'm going to kind of minimize the size of the website. I'm going to bring my name down a little bit and focus a little bit more on what this is. So this is just character design. That's what I'm putting in here for now. Okay, so we've got this, and we can see it's running over our scene now. So let's go ahead and bring the size down. I'm just sliding this on the timeline so I can access it over here. Okay. So I'm going to end it right here where the other one starts. And we want to see some kind of transition that's a little nicer instead of just going from the black title card straight into our character. It'd be nice to have this fade off and then fade in. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So we'll start with fading up on the title. Let's go ahead and twirl down, and under transform we have an opacity down here that's currently at 100%. So these little time clocks over here, if we click on this, this allows us to put keyframes in. So right now, this little yellow tick right here is our first keyframe. It's at 100%. I'm going to take it down to 0. Okay. Then I'm just going to go down the timeline here to about 2 seconds, and I'm just going to click and drag this up to 100%. So it automatically created a keyframe. since we have this selected, it's auto keyframing. So now what we have is a nice 2-second fade up. Okay, I'm going to go down till 8 seconds in, and I'm just going to kind of click and touch that. All that's going to do is just pop in another keyframe at 100%, and then I'm going to come down to the end here at about 10 seconds and take this back down to 0. Okay, so what that's doing, we've got a fade up. It holds for a couple seconds and then it fades out. Okay, and then we've got our character starting up here, so we want to do the same thing with our character. Let's go ahead and twirl that up. We're going to come down to our monster, the turntable, and we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to set a keyframe here. I'm going to make sure it's at 0 opacity, and I'm just a little off here, so you can click and drag these. I want to make sure I'm starting right on frame 1, and I'm just going to go in 2 seconds, do a 2-second fade up, and drag that up to 100%. Okay, so that's a much smoother transition here now. Okay, let's go ahead and close that up, and we're going to come down to the end of our scene right here. We're going to want to fade out on that. I think this is actually going to be over 30 seconds long, so let's go ahead and adjust that right now. We're going to come to our composition settings, and we're going to add another 6 seconds at the end here. So you have to put in semicolon and zeros. Okay, so we just added a little bit more on there to create a title at the end. Okay, we'll use the same title at the end and just duplicate that. So this allows us to come over here, and at the end of our turntable, on the second one, the one that we duplicated, we want to do the same thing where it fades out. Okay, so I'm going to come in a couple seconds from the end, right about there, and under the duplicate, this is the second one here that we copied, I'm going to click that. It's going to create a keyframe. We're going to leave that at 100%. Take it down to the end here of the turntable and bring the opacity down to 0. Okay, so now we've got the fade in, turns around twice, and it fades out. Okay, all right, so let's put our same title here at the end. So I'm just going to hold that. Control D is going to duplicate it, and I'm going to slide it down here. And in this case, we don't need it as long. We're going to have just the same title at the end, and we're going to have to make some adjustments to those keyframes and slide those around into place. Okay, so just go ahead and drag those. So this is the 0, and it's going to fade up and fade down. So we've got one hiding down here. Let's grab that. Okay, so I'm just adjusting it so it fits within those last 6 seconds. Okay, so the end of the turntable, and then fade up and fade down. Okay, I've lost my watermark. I think that's I've got them color coded here. So the watermark is the yellow one. I want to just go ahead and stretch that out so that remains on for the full time. Okay. All right, so let's bring in those two pieces of static art. We've got the where'd they go? There they are. So we've got the textures as well as the drawing of the character. And these are nice to have in there. It's just some additional information. Something else that you would want to add later on, if you have some time, is a wireframe. Typically you want to see a wireframe overshaded. We'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end, but it's always nice to kind of see how the character was constructed as well as some of the concept art. So even if you had some sketches that you like, you can put those in the background, maybe on this side. Some expressions of the character. Those would be nice to just kind of fade in and fade out. Let's go ahead and get these set up. So the first one we're going to work with is this guy here. Let me just go ahead and give it a color I can recognize. Okay. So I don't want these to be on the entire duration. I think I want it to do close to a full turn and then have them come on for the second turn. So right about here, I'm going to have them fade on. Let's go ahead and drag this up to here. I've got kind of a little issue here with kind of the layering. So we want to make sure this is sitting on top of the monster turntable, the Jpegs. We're going to right mouse click and change the blending mode. So this is very similar to Photoshop on layering. I'm going to multiply it so it sits on top of the background. It's looking a little dark, so I'm going to make an adjustment to that. I'm going to come under Effects, and we have some color correction options here. I'm going to take the hue and saturation and drop that in and just bump up the saturation a little bit. So the saturation's up, and I feel like it's just looking a little green, so I'm going to push it over to the blue side. And that's kind of helping it pop out from the background. Okay. All right, just come back to the project window here. And we're going to do the same thing, fade on and fade off. Okay. So this is where it's going to start. So we're going to click on the animation setting for opacity, take it down to 0 opacity. Come in a couple seconds, bring it up to 100%, take it down to here, just bump that so it creates another keyframe, and then come to the end here and we're going to fade that off. Okay. Alright, so we've got a fade on, fade off. All right, so let's go ahead and close that one up here, and we're going to do the same thing now for the textures. Let's go ahead and move that up here so it's sitting on top of our turntable. And same thing, so it's the pink one here. I'm going to basically make this the same size or the same length as the character drawing, and repeat the process. Okay, so I'm going to come to frame 1, twirl down here. We've got our transform, opacity, taking that to 0, come in a couple seconds. I'm pretty much matching it up with this one right here. I'm just eyeballing it up to 100%, and looks like that's about where it's starting to fade out. Just bump that, create another keyframe, and then take it to the end and down to 0. Okay, and close that now. Alright, so we've got our title card, our character going around twice, artwork coming up and fading out, and another title card at the end here. Okay, so it looks like we've got everything ready here. Let's go ahead and save our scene. I'm going to call it Character Turntable, and go ahead and save that. And we're ready to render out our scene now. We'll come under Composition and Add to Render Queue. Okay. We want to make some changes here to how we're outputting this. So the output mode, we want to click on that. Let's just say Custom. We want to make sure that we're rendering this out as a QuickTime movie. Post-render actions, we're going to leave it none. For channels, we just need RGB. We don't need the alpha in there. We want to make sure we're at millions of colors. Pre-multiplied. And this is actually correct here. Let's just make sure that we've got it set up though. If you need to change this, the codec we're using is the H.264. So make sure that's set, and we want the best quality. And everything else can remain the same there. Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead and hit render. We're going to see the yellow bar coming across here and our render time. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at that. I've got it out here. Okay, so there's our title fade, our turntable, and our fade out. Okay. So this is a good basic turntable presentation. If you were submitting this for work purposes, or maybe into a master's degree program somewhere, into an animation program, you'd probably want to do a couple more things. You would definitely want the resolution to be higher than what it is. We rendered out our images from Maya as 720. So they're 1280 by 720 HD. You would probably want to take that up to 1080. And the other thing you want to do, I can just show you an example here, you would want to have a wireframe overshaded. Putting some kind of a camera move as well. So this is the wireframe overshaded. This shows the viewer or the creative person looking at your work that you know how to model. Okay. So those would be things that you would want to add to your scene if you were going to do a full-blown presentation. You would definitely want to have this wireframe. And I'll do a lesson on that a little bit later on, getting a portfolio ready for a presentation. Okay, but hopefully that was helpful, and you've got your turntable rendered out into a movie now.